Welcome back. As promised, on the cold side of the pillow, on the flip side of the pillow, we have the great Luke Jones leading off the show today, as always. And Luke, here we are again. And you were way ahead of, at least of me. You were the first one I heard bring up the non-exclusive tag scenario for Lamar Jackson, and I dismissed it. I never thought they would do that. I was always in the camp of they're going to put the exclusive tag on him and trade him. But you looked at it from a different set of lenses, and you came up with, hey, this may not be a bad idea. And so far, at least one day in, and things can change rapidly, of course, but one day in, you were spot on with your analysis.
Yeah, well, and I appreciate you mentioning that, but the sad thing is I had kind of backed off of that the last few weeks. I thought it would be the exclusive tag, but all along I tried to look at this pragmatically. And you and I have talked about this a lot. Nestor and I have debated this a lot. I think regardless of your own personal feelings on Lamar Jackson's value, on him wanting a fully guaranteed deal as opposed to the Ravens not wanting to make that risk, I think there was always a sense of there's a fair position that he has and that the Ravens have here. Regardless of where you fall on that scale,
Mm-hmm.
he made a very sound argument in saying, hey, the Cleveland Browns gave this to Deshaun Watson. I'm more accomplished than him. I'm not nearly as problematic off the field. Why am I not deserving of this? On the flip side, the Ravens, we've gone through all that. But the point that I kept coming back to is, and I wrote this at BaltimorePositive.com again in the wake of the Ravens giving the non-exclusive tag, is anytime you're going to make a move of this nature, you need to ask yourself, what do you want to accomplish with this? And I think it would have been very easy and certainly understandable, and that was what most people anticipated in using the exclusive tag, right? You eliminate the risk of Lamar Jackson negotiating with anyone else, and you maintain all the power. However, what are you looking to do with that? To just maintain control? And regardless of what the potential fallout could be, which would be a disgruntled player, disenchanted, a player who has felt he hasn't had an opportunity to seek his value elsewhere, whether he has an agent or not, formally not having that flexibility to do that, even though an agent could certainly work on that through back channels, as we've discussed
Mm-hmm.
ad nauseum. But there was always a sense of, is the exclusive tag getting you to a solution that would involve maintaining a long-term partnership here, which I think, regardless of how the Ravens have felt at any given point over the last 2+ years, or Lamar Jackson has felt over the last 2+ years, I think it's very clear both sides have wanted that for at least a significant stretch of time. Now, how to go about doing that has been the problem. So instead of the exclusive tag, which, as you mentioned, if you're thinking about it more in terms of thinking a trade is inevitable or maybe the desired outcome at that point in time, then yeah, you control it. You talk to other teams. You broker a contract with Lamar Jackson and that other team, and then you make a trade. But if you're looking to try to find some semblance of a compromise or not a compromise as much as a solution that can work for both sides, sometimes you do have to give a little. And this was a case of the Ravens did this with Ray Lewis back in 2009. They've done it
Mm-hmm.
with other players. Now, never this high profile, never these kind of stakes. So it is risky. And this could still theoretically blow up in their face. And it could define Eric DaCosta's legacy as a general manager. But clearly, you don't make a decision like this blind, completely blind. You have estimated, projected, done your homework, research, talked to people around the league, and tried to project what the market's going to look like for Lamar and what potential offer sheets could be out there from a variety of teams with a variety of salary cap situations for themselves. But ultimately, this comes down to when you're at an impasse, when you're at a stalemate, and you can relate to this. When you're in the car business, I mean, there's all the time there's
Hey,
negotiating that goes along
no
on, and there's
different. Right
right,
player,
and
right
there's a
price. Yeah.
right, and there's a bottom line that works for the company, like Coons, and there's a bottom line that's going to work for any individual given their financial situation and what they're willing to do. So in this case, even if it was unorthodox with Lamar not having an agent, and even if there has been some frustration on both sides, which I think is painfully obvious at this point, there is still a sense of the Ravens relinquishing a little bit of power, a little bit of control, a little bit of leverage here, but not all of it, because this isn't a case where Lamar can just sign somewhere and that's it, and they get nothing other than a third-round pick, which is what would be the case if he were truly an
Sure.
unrestricted free agent. But it gives him a chance to go out and see that. And theoretically, putting aside the discussion about collusion, whether it exists or not, I think it's going to be extremely difficult to prove that. And I'm still
Sure it
not
is.
convinced that even some of the teams that have leaked media notions that they're not going to be in on Lamar, whether that's actually going to be reality or not. But this gives Lamar Jackson theoretically the chance to either prove the Ravens wrong and say, hey, what you were offering me wasn't what the market was, and I can do better, and I'm signing this offer sheet. And then it forces the envelope. It forces the Ravens to make a decision then to either say, all right, you were right, and you match it, or even if it's a case where they're not comfortable or they feel they can't match it, where they do at least come away with the two picks. Or Lamar Jackson realizes that, hey, maybe that offer the Ravens was giving me wasn't, uh, I don't even want to say an insult, just wasn't what he was looking for. And maybe that brings them back to the table to work something out.
Mm.
Now, there are still other scenarios that exist. A trade is still a possibility. Even if you get a team involved and says, hey, what can we do to make this worth your while for you to not want to match an offer sheet? And then you start getting into the conversation as far as what it
Sure.
could be. Now, is that 3 or 4 first round picks, anything like that? I don't know. Whatever that would look like theoretically. And there's still the risk, and this was the risk even with the exclusive tag, of Lamar now being at a point where he's exhausted his entire rookie contract, including the 5th-year option, and he tries to play hardball and says, you know what? I'm not playing for a nickel less than what I want. And if I have to sit out or if I need to hold out through training camp or into the regular season, then so be it. And you know very well the NFLPA, for some of their big picture goals, they would fully support Lamar Jackson
Mm.
in doing that and advocate for him, even if they're not going to look out for his individual well-being in doing so when you really think about it. But so you still have all these different scenarios that can play out, and I still don't know how exactly this is going to play out. I will say this, and Nestor and I already debated this, but I do think I feel a greater confidence level in Lamar Jackson staying put now than I did thinking it was going to be the exclusive tag with a stronger intention of trading, knowing that at the very least, the exclusive tag certainly wasn't going to prompt a swift compromise for the Ravens and him working out a long-term deal, because you'd still be having the same argument, him wanting a fully guaranteed deal or Watson like money and the Ravens not being there. So I do think this is a case where it has a greater chance to force some action, to force some movement, to force some semblance of compromise from one side or the other, or maybe a little bit of both, and you could work something out. At the very least, even if it is going to remain a stalemate, which it still could, if no offer sheet comes in and Lamar just says, hey, I'm still not ready to sign your deal, and I'm not happy about a $32.4 million tag that's below market, if we're being obvious as
Sure.
far as what quarterbacks are worth. So it could still drag out, and this could still be a case where we're talking about this come training camp and maybe even beyond, depending on if he signed his tag. But at the very least, in the short term, the Ravens don't have quite the level of headache from a salary cap standpoint and from a standpoint of trying to construct the rest of your roster. Is this ideal? No, of course not. None of these options were ideal at this point, other than the Ravens and Lamar striking a long-term agreement, which, hey, they've been at it for 2 years. And as we said, well, what was going to change now compared to, over the last 2 years? So it's definitely a risk. There's no question about that. But you have to think, for the Ravens to even entertain doing this, that they feel pretty confident about what the market is going to be. They've examined the potential suitors. They've examined, probably, and again, this is where you get into what's formal collusion and what's not. I'm sure Steve Bisciotti and Eric DeCosta have you know, tested, they've been testing the waters to kind of see what the temperature is as far as a team willing to accommodate Lamar. And I think there's another factor to this that we've talked about a lot with restricted free agents in the past, where this is the start of free agency. You might have a team that would love to have Lamar Jackson, but are they going to exhaust the time, the energy, to negotiate with a player who doesn't have an agent, mind you, just to have the Ravens match the deal and basically say, you know what, are we really going to do this just to strike a deal for the Ravens to match? So I think that is where it will scare some teams off. Now, I fully expect, regardless of the first hour after the announcement was made and all the reports of teams being out, there are going to be some teams that are at least going to talk to Lamar Jackson. I'd be shocked by that. Because if not, then yeah, I am wondering about collusion. But at the same time, you'd have to think the Ravens have a pretty high confidence level that Lamar's wish for an offer is not going to materialize, or they're fully prepared to match because again, if it is truly a case of them walking away with only 2 first round picks and not knowing where those first round picks are going to be, because hey, it could be a team later in the first round that suddenly wants to go after Lamar Jackson. Who knows? If you can make the deal right for the Ravens not to match. So I think there's certainly a risk, but I think it's very much a calculated, weighted risk that the Ravens have looked long and hard at, and we'll see how it's going to play out, but certainly makes it more interesting now as we're counting down to the start of the new league year, knowing that this isn't a case where, okay, if the Ravens want to make a trade, like they're controlling everything. This is a case of Lamar Jackson has every opportunity to go out there and talk, negotiate, visit with other teams, and see if another team drops that fully guaranteed offer sheet onto his lap. And if that's the case, then it becomes that much more interesting to see where the Ravens are here, whether the Ravens truly, honestly, at the end of the day, gave Lamar their best offer, or when it comes down to the potential for losing him, are they indeed willing to give in and give that fully guaranteed deal? So again, this is about forcing action, forcing something to happen after both sides were, at least with what we've heard Lamar's side, Lamar Jackson himself has been unwilling to move from his position. And again, that's been his right all along.
Yeah, I after thinking it through, and again, I credit you for focusing me on it. I didn't see another way out for the Ravens. They have, I believe, until March 15th to get under the cap, including the 32.4 million they're allocating for Lamar Jackson. So they really didn't have a choice. And uh, as far as the collusion argument is concerned, that's just a cheap way out. Initially, it's knee jerk because look, Kyler Murray got 160 million guaranteed. Russell Wilson 161 million guaranteed. But owners took notice of that, and those
Yeah.
two guys didn't have great years by any stretch. Not saying they can't bounce back this year, but we've seen the most recent contracts, right? Derek Carr 100 million guaranteed in 4 years. Daniel Jones 82 million guaranteed. Geno Smith 30. So the money it's just 231 guaranteed, just doesn't seem to factor anywhere into the equation under the current market.
Well, and it's not just the money, it's also 2 first round picks, right? It's also exhausting the energy and structuring this in a way that the Ravens aren't going to match. That's why so many people talked about the Falcons, because you look at all the cap space they have for 2023 from the standpoint of, could they, one, fully guarantee a deal, and two, structure it in a manner that even if the Ravens wanted to do that, they'd have to be
Right.
looking at cutting, I don't know, 6 or 7 players just to match it. So there's a lot more to it than people want to make it out to be. Look, contrary to what social media would suggest, you can feel Lamar Jackson is a tremendous football player and also feel it's very risky, and if not too risky, to fully guarantee the deal with fair questions of what you and I've talked about for the better part of a couple years, which has become magnified over the end of the last 2 years where he's been injured and hasn't been able to play, in wondering not even about a catastrophic injury, just how is his playing style going to age when he is slowing down a little bit as he gets older? Because I mean, it's math and science. There have been studies done on this as far as an athlete's peak performance. It's typically in their early 20s, right? That's not to say Lamar becomes slow overnight, but if he's just a little bit slower and he's a little bit slower and he's getting banged up a little bit more, what impact does that have? And we talked about this, and this is where I will put some of it on the Ravens. Sticking with Greg Roman in hindsight a year too long and not doing as much at the wide receiver position to see if Lamar, that dial could be turned gradually from Lamar becoming more and more of a passer and a little bit less of a runner. But it's where they are right now. So all of those issues that I just mentioned, that the Ravens, who know Lamar Jackson better than anyone, have wrestled with themselves in determining how to value him, all of these other teams are going to have to face that too. So that's where we look at this thing. And to your point, I have no idea of whether there's collusion going on or not. I know it's happened before. It famously happened in Major League Baseball in the 80s with free agency, and the players' union ended up winning and winning big as a result. We know that there have been accusations of that in the NFL, and we can certainly go back to Colin Kaepernick. But whether it is going on or not, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult for Lamar Jackson and the union to prove that, if they even would choose to exercise that fight, and what that might entail for Lamar Jackson and his career. So, you can talk about that. And look, I wonder as much as anyone why some teams that certainly have needs at quarterback are leaking that out there in the first hour. At the same time, if you are looking at it from a strategic standpoint,
Sure.
it also doesn't benefit to put it out there that, oh yeah, we're desperate to get Lamar Jackson, we'll pay
Right.
anything he wants, right? So there's always, as is always the case, and it's usually lost on the internet and social media, Twitter
Yep.
and Facebook and whatnot. There's nuance at work here. There's a
Sure.
lot of nuance at work here, and we've talked about that over the last 2 years with Lamar's deal, ranging from some of the issues I just mentioned to him not having an agent. So I think that's where.
Let's not forget that the Falcons have a young quarterback who in the loss to the Ravens, I thought he looked pretty good.
Yeah.
He didn't look terrible. Now, is he Lamar Jackson? No, but he was also a rookie. So that's the other piece. You don't want to sit there and destroy the mind of a young quarterback currently on your roster either. So you're going to play some poker. You're going to bluff some of the other teams.
Yeah, right. And the Falcons might end up being all in on Lamar Jackson. We don't know, but the early indications, we'll see. And again, keep in mind, none of these teams can actually start talking to Lamar Jackson until next week. So
Monday. Yeah.
how much of this is smoke and just the kind of, the Browns were completely out on Deshaun Watson because he eliminated them, and then, well, they offered him a fully guaranteed deal. And what, Atlanta and New Orleans had been the finalists, and they weren't the finalists anymore. They were the losers. So you never know what's going to happen. And that's why this is interesting, because Lamar Jackson has the opportunity to talk with other teams. How long will he wait here? How long will this situation play out? I mean, some people have talked about the scenario that the Dolphins, who cannot talk to him right now because they don't have a first round pick, could they wait until after the draft? I think that's unlikely, but they're it's also very unlikely for a quarterback of this caliber to be available even to this degree. So, to me, you sit back, you wait and see what happens. I think if you're the Ravens, you're hoping what happens is Lamar does not get the offer that he seeks, and then the proverbial light bulb goes off and saying, you know what, maybe the Ravens were valuing me as much as everyone else. At least acknowledging that everyone else has to give 2 first-round picks to sign me, away. Or, if that's not the case, then maybe Lamar is willing to play on the franchise tag at the non-exclusive number, which I know people will say, well, the Ravens, that makes things more difficult. But at the same time, hey, if you were going to sign Lamar to a long-term deal last year, these cap numbers, like $32.4 million, I mean, they're going to go up way higher than that on a long-term deal
They are.
eventually.
Sure.
So
Sure.
that you kind of look at this and you weigh the strengths and the the positives and the negatives here, the strengths and the weaknesses to doing this. And certainly there are drawbacks. Certainly there is some real risk. I don't know if it's extraordinarily high risk, but it's certainly meaningful non-zero risk of losing him. But I feel at the end of the day why the Ravens did this. One, they felt they had a great grip on what the market's going to be. They better be right for their sake. And two, I think it came down to, if you're looking for a solution that involves working something out long term, I think you had to do something to force some action here, because the exclusive tag, to me, that was going to feel like more of the same, unless you were looking to trade Lamar Jackson. And I think with them not going that direction, I don't think that's on the forefront of their mind as far as their top option right now, as far as what they want to do.
Yeah, no question about it. And of course, it's easy for folks to talk about moving away from Lamar Jackson, but then it opens them up. Then what do you do at quarterback? That's the
Yeah.
other piece. You can't win with that one. We know that. Eric DeCosta knows that. The league knows that. And uh, this is just a mess, though, because It's just one of those things that we wish was resolved a long time ago. That way, the team would have some clarity moving forward in terms of the free agency, the draft, etc. I am glad though that they put the non-exclusive tag on him in the sense that the roster restructuring wouldn't have to be as dramatic as it would have been with the exclusive tag.
Yeah, and I mean, if there had been the exclusive tag, keep in mind that that full amount wouldn't have kicked in right away, but you know that it's coming, right? You know that by right before the draft is when it would have gone up to, it projected around 45. It depends if there's some restructures and other quarterback deals and what have you, but it would have been substantially more. That probably would have been having to cut a couple more guys and maybe having to restructure a half dozen more contracts. I mean, who knows? As we always say with the salary cap, there's always a way, but there's a opportunity cost there. What are you doing that's going to then cost you in the short term or the long term? And that's what. Yeah, I mean, people joke about it with the Saints, and now they signed Derek Carr, but go look at what their dead money is, and just look at what they've hemorrhaged great players over the last few off seasons, and okay, they make it work, and yes, you can get under the cap, but at what cost? They're kind of cut off at the knees, and even with Derek Carr, it's like, okay, yeah, sure, I'll buy in, like they'll be better than they were with Andy Dalton, but do you think they're a team that's a viable contender in the NFC? No.
No.
So there's always that cost, and I think that's where for the Ravens it is nice that it is the cheaper amount. But as I pointed out a little bit earlier, there is still some very significant risk here that the Ravens could encounter down the line in terms of where's Lamar Jackson at from a personal standpoint after
Right.
being tagged, especially if that does not result in offer sheets and the kind of interest that he's looking for. And frankly, he deserves. I mean, my goodness, he should have teams wanting to talk to him, and he's a great player. But let's say that doesn't happen, and let's say he's kind of stuck, and the Ravens kind of say, all right, well, Lamar, how'd that work out for you? Is it a case of he's going to be willing and say, okay, well, the Ravens, they are offering more, or does he dig in because, hey, there's a lot of pride involved with all these guys, whether you're talking the GMs and the owners. I mean, my goodness, we've talked about the owners with this Deshaun Watson thing and hating Jimmy Haslam and the Browns being so dumb. You're telling me that they don't have egos involved with that? There's egos involved with all of these guys. It's how they got to be as successful as they've been in their various avenues. But I think what you do, and I don't think it drives what you do, but I think it's something you have to acknowledge in the back of your mind is understanding where the Ravens were with Lamar at the end of last year and the apparent disconnect, understanding that at this point in time, the Ravens are under no obligation to pay Lamar more than $32.4 million for the tag for 2023, which is absolutely below what his value is in terms of AAV. So you have that. Do you have a case of everything that happened with the injury last year that, not saying Lamar's out there broadcasting it, but is he kind of looking for a fresh start? Yep. Is he going to hear what we're hearing now, which is so much negative reaction, whether it's fair or unfair? Lots of negative reaction from media and from players around the league talking about the Ravens doing this and the subsequent lack of reported interest from some of these other teams. Does that influence Lamar Jackson's attitude? Is this a case where he says, I don't care what the offers or lack thereof have been. I don't care that you can pay me $32.4 million to play this year. I'm not playing for a nickel less than what I want. And, whether he's willing to sit out training camp or to go to greater lengths. Not saying that that's what I would do. Not saying that that's what would be what I would view as the smart thing to do, but he's certainly entitled to doing that. And you never know what's going to happen on that front. So we've talked about everything with Monken and a new offensive system and the fallout of him not being around for the spring and summer, which he'd be under no contractual obligation to do if he hasn't signed the tag. So, but all of those things I just mentioned would have been the case with the exclusive tag as well. So coming back to the decision that was made on Tuesday, again, I think it's a case of, the Ravens take some risk, but they're thinking that it's going to turn out in a enviable way for them. And they're hoping that perhaps that prompts Lamar Jackson to come back to the negotiating table and, take whatever's offer that was there, assuming that's still there, which I would hope the Ravens wouldn't try to play hardball
I wouldn't
on
think
top
so.
of,
No,
I mean,
I
at that
think that would
point,
be
then,
disingenuous. No, no,
yeah,
I
at
wouldn't
that
think
point,
so.
again, that's where you look at, what are you trying to accomplish here? Are you
No,
trying to, quote, win? Or are you trying to get something worked out long term that both
no.
sides feel okay about? So, but
That would
again,
definitely irk the player if they
yeah,
pull whether it's 133, whatever. And I don't see them. They're too
right.
classy. And people forget this is a very classy organization. This knocking the Ravens. I mean, people forget that this has been a model organization for many years. Yeah, lately has some of the shine, wore off of them, but it happens. Things happen in cycles sometimes.
Yeah, no question. I mean, they're not perfect. They've definitely had missteps. I mean, I've beaten them up about the
Sure,
wide receiver position going back to, trading Anquan Bolden. You can go back even before, like go back to the early years, Travis Taylor and Patrick Johnson, and some
yeah,
very underwhelming picks all the way back. But you're right. I think, again, some missteps, some, they've lost some of their shine. There's no question about that. Especially we talked about the NFLPA report a week ago, and wondering about, how's this going to work with Steve Saunders moving on and the new
sure.
strength coaches. I mean, there are definitely things you can look at, but at the same time, this perception that's been created with a lot of national media who, let's face it, don't follow the team as intimately as we do here, look at this and say, okay, the Ravens are being cheap. And hey, Lamar Jackson gets two or three teams that are, trying to give him a fully guaranteed deal, then you could say, well, the Ravens have been cheap and they'll get a chance to match the offer. But how we look at all, from Roquan Smith, Mark Andrews,
Yeah,
Marlon Humphrey,
not
Ronnie
cheap.
Stanley. These were all deals that were either top of market or right
Sure they
there. And
were.
in the case of Mark Andrews, I think even though he didn't get quite as much money as Travis Kelce, for example, when you look at the structure of the guaranteed money and the payout over the first few years of the deal, it's a nice deal.
Great
I've
deal.
seen, and I've seen people that are way more versed in contract language and structure say as much. So I don't think this is a case where the Ravens are a
No.
cheap, or as I see some of the cool kids on Twitter call them a poverty organization and things like that. I mean, no. Now, do they do things differently than some of those teams like the LA Rams, or we mentioned the Saints a couple minutes ago that have gone on this position of basically saying future cap space be darned, we're gonna try to sell out to win right now. You and I have talked about would have, having liked to have seen them be a little more aggressive back in, say, 2020, during Lamar Jackson's rookie contract, but they've decided to be more of that, be competitive, have a chance to contend every single year approach. Is that the right approach? That's up for debate. I would say that it's led to a very high floor, but yeah, it has limited their ceiling at times, and especially when you get some injuries, the way that they've had some injuries here in recent years. But none of none of what I just mentioned is something that I would view as couldn't be justified or has been patently unfair or anything like that. So, people are going to say what they're going to say. And look, players should stick up for one another because, if the millionaires aren't going to stick up for each other, the billionaires
Sure.
aren't going to stick up for them. So I understand that dynamic. Just as I have said, I fully respect Lamar Jackson's stance of wanting a fully guaranteed deal. It's why I've said this has been so difficult. I've never found either side to truly be at fault. I think they both come from a fair position. But it brings us back full circle now to what we talked about at the beginning. Maybe that's why the non-exclusive tag is the right way to go, that it gives Lamar not full-blown freedom because he's not an unrestricted free agent, and there are those two first-round picks attached to what he wants, which is, oh yeah, a whole lot of money, whole lot of fully guaranteed money anyway. So it does impact his market, but it at least gives him an opportunity to go out there and talk with other teams, and we'll see what happens. At this point, like I said, I have more confidence now than I did a couple weeks ago that he's going to remain a Baltimore Raven, but I don't know that for certain. And again, it comes back to what we said. Even though I'm not sure who that team is right now, and maybe it is the Atlanta Falcons playing some possum early on, and maybe they changed their mind, but I'm not sure who that team's going to be, but it can be one team that completely changes this dynamic and puts the Ravens in not just a losing position, but a embarrassing, inexcusable, terrible position potentially. But they're clearly willing to take that risk, and we'll see how it plays out. It certainly makes it more interesting than just talking about, well, he's got the exclusive tag, and well, the Ravens could trade him or not, or well, they'll just see how this plays out and see when he's going to show up for training camp if he does.
And with the 146 pick in the 4th round, the Baltimore Ravens select quarterback Stetson Bennett out of the University of Georgia. You know that's coming no matter what happens. I just, when you got a college quarterback, undersized, 2 national championships, did look well at the combine, threw a beautiful deep ball. You got his OC here in Baltimore, and look, I think the Ravens, as it stands, will probably trade back, pick up an extra pick somewhere, take a cornerback high, a wide receiver high, best player available. But I do see that I don't think Stetson Bennett drops lower than the 4th round to the Ravens. Not saying he's going to be a starter or a world beater or whatever, but they need some insurance. They need a guy who's going to come in, know the system, work well with the OC, and hopefully Lamar shows up at some point. And Todd Monken said as much during his presser, right? He kind of crystal balled this and said, look, when he shows up, we'll get him up to speed.
Yeah, and look, here's the ideal scenario at this point that feels more plausible now than it did a week ago. Lamar Jackson has an opportunity to talk to some teams. We'll see how many are interested. We'll see what that interest level is. We'll see what the offer sheets are. If that doesn't go all that well for Lamar Jackson, maybe he's ready to finish a deal and consummate a long-term deal. And maybe that's wrapped up in the next couple weeks. And if it is, great, then the Ravens have probably created some additional cap space, and more power to them for trying to get a veteran wide receiver or re-sign Marcus Peters or whatever it might mean. So you have that. I think you certainly look at, and I think this is something they'd look at either way, to try to re-sign Tyler Huntley. And that could be the second round tender, let's say, with him being a restricted free agent. I don't think there would be a team that would want to sign him and give up a second round pick. I could be wrong on that, but I'm not going to buy
a young Pro Bowl quarterback,
yeah.
Luke. I'm his agent. I want all of it for Tyler Huntley.
Yeah. So, but even with the best case scenario that, okay, let's say Lamar Jackson doesn't see the market that he's hoping for, or maybe he does, and maybe a team signs him to an offer sheet and the Ravens say, all right, we've got to do it because we can't lose Lamar. And this game of chicken that's been going on for 2 years, well, then it's over and Lamar wins, but we still win because we still have him.
100%.
I could still, even if that happens and Lamar's there for OTAs even, I still think, Stetson Bennett makes all the sense in the world as a day 3 pick for them.
100%.
Because under that scenario, you're probably not going to sign Tyler Huntley beyond just the coming year. So, then yeah, he's your developmental backup quarterback. So, we'll see how it plays out.
They're going to change the offense. They're going to open up the offense more. So maybe look, Tyler Huntley looked okay, made that monumental gaffe during the playoff game. So that kind of has soured me a little bit on him. But I do think that they'll draft Bennett if he's there, if he's available in the 4th round. If not, I don't see him going any higher than that, but I've been wrong before.
Yeah, you never know. And again, I mean, there's so much out there. I mean, it's hard to pinpoint guys that are going to be day 3 picks. When, my goodness, look at the difference of opinion of the quarterbacks. I mean, you see some of the talk about Anthony Richardson or Will Levis. Those two especially. Boy, polarizing guys. Some see either of those guys as top 5 picks, and then there are other people that think they're going to be busts. I mean, so yeah, there's always that. So yeah, trying to project it, but we'll see how this plays out.
Those 4 quarterbacks, Luke, odds are 2 are going to be good, 2 are going to be busts, and you just
generally
don't know,
how it works.
You just don't know which 2. I mean, the only one I like is C.J. Stroud. I don't like anyone else except C.J. Stroud if I'm making the pick. But again, I've been wrong before. But it's fool's gold, but unless you have a quarterback, you don't have one, and that's the problem with the Ravens trade away Lamar Jackson. Then what? Is it Baker Mayfield and you hope and pray and spray? Or if you don't have a draft pick high enough to pick one of these 4 quarterbacks, and look, Anthony Richardson to me looks like a fantastic athlete. I think he completed 53% of his passes in college. College quarterbacks don't typically get more accurate when they turn professional. So I do have concerns.
Yeah, and I mean, for every Josh Allen, there are quarterbacks like Kyle Bowler was a great example. Wasn't very accurate.
Josh Rosen. You talk about Joshes, you could just you go right down the line.
Well, and you just mentioned, I'll be honest, and look, I wouldn't expect this to happen. For one thing, the rest of the roster, I don't think would allow them to do this. Although, stranger things have happened, I suppose. But if it were me, and if you are losing Lamar Jackson, hypothetically, man, I'd be much more excited about the prospects of getting Caleb Williams out of USC next year. But what would that, you know,
Right.
you're gonna have to be the number one pick
Yeah.
again, assuming
Yeah.
things, and things always change and year to year. So, but yeah, I mean, the idea of that's where I kept coming back to this comment with Nestor, because he's been much more of the thought that they're likely to move on from Lamar. And that's fine. That's his opinion. I respect that. But I've just, trading away your franchise quarterback's a heck of a lot easier than finding your next one. And that's where you just have to be careful. And this idea, and that's where we do acknowledge the risk of the non-exclusive. If you lose Lamar Jackson, and even if you get a couple first round picks, but you whiff on his replacement,
You
or
can't.
you draft his replacement next year and you whiff on that guy, and you see Lamar Jackson winning, going to a Super Bowl with Atlanta or wherever it would be, boy, you're going to have a large portion of this fan base that's never going to forgive you, or won't forgive you for a long, long time. And look, you have to wear that then. So that's where there is risk involved in this. And that's why, even though I, was kicking around the idea of the non-exclusive back in January, I can't take credit for being on that all along, because I still wavered on that myself and thought that
Look,
they ultimately were going to give the exclusive. But hey, we'll see how this plays out. It's definitely interesting, and ranging from who the potential suitors are to, yes, even talking about the potential for collusion, and whether that can at all be proven or not, if it's true or not. It's certainly interesting, because it is very rare territory when a a quarterback of this magnitude becomes available, even if it's not
sure it
full-blown
is.
free agency. So it'll be really interesting to see how this plays out. That's for sure.
These are uncharted, shark-infested, crocodile-infested, alligator-infested waters that we are in. Luke, appreciate the time as always, and the insight. Please tell our listeners where they can find you, WNST, Baltimore Positive, your blog, all the other great stuff that you do.
Absolutely. I encourage everyone to follow us on Twitter at WNST. You can follow me personally at Baltimore Luke. Check out my blog at BaltimorePositive.com, sponsored by Coons Ford of Baltimore. My latest, talking about the Ravens tag approach with Lamar Jackson. Yes, it's risky, but I think forcing some action is probably necessary if you are still looking for that solution of a long-term agreement. Time will tell. We'll see how it plays out. But you can see my latest 12 Ravens thoughts, some coaching staff updates, as the Ravens on Wednesday hired Chuck Smith as their new outside linebackers coach. Really interesting hire, a longtime private pass rushing coach who's coached the likes of Von Miller and Aaron Donald and Max Crosby. So pretty interesting outside the box hire. My thoughts at BaltimorePositive.com. You want to be on the WNST Baltimore Positive text service, sponsored by Coons Ford of Baltimore. If you received the update that the Ravens had placed the non-exclusive franchise tag on Lamar Jackson. You will get updates sent directly to your mobile device on the latest Ravens free agent signings, re-signings, cap casualties, any significant local sports news sent directly to your mobile device via the WNST Baltimore Positive text service, sponsored by Coons Ford of Baltimore. And of course, anything throughout the week on AM 1570 with Nestor. Any Raven sound as press conference season coming up, with any signings, re-signings, a Lamar Jackson extension, who knows what it could be, any of that from Owings Mills, as well as in just a few weeks, I'll be back at the ballpark as the Orioles will be opening up the 2023 season. Check out all of that at BaltimorePositive.com.
All right, Luke, appreciate it as always, and I'm sure we'll have more to say as the weeks go by until this thing is resolved or not.
Hey, next week at this time, the new league year will have opened. Dennis, we could be talking about a Lamar Jackson contract being in place at that point for the Ravens or someone else. Who knows? So, or talking about a number of roster moves. 'Tis the season where business is not about to pick up. It already has picked up. So certainly be interested. Looking forward to talking to you, my friend.
Likewise. There he goes, Luke Jones here, 1570 AM WNST. We'll take a quick break and come back right after this.